it falls. Brown says the towers were built to withstand 200-mile-an-hour hurricanes, the 100-year storm, the worst nature could dish out. But he says an airplane crash never entered anyone's mind.
However, that's not entirely true.
Yet the impact of the planes alone did not cause that failure. In fact, tall building designers try to anticipate air accidents. Marc Loiseau is president of a company called Controlled Demolition.
When this structure was designed, it was designed, to the best of my understanding, to take the impact of what was then the state-of-the-art airplane being used in our country, the Boeing 707.
The building was designed to have a fully loaded 707 crash into it. That was the largest plane at the time. I believe that the building probably could sustain multiple impacts of jetliners because this structure is like the mosquito netting on your screen door, this intense grid, and the jet plane is just a pencil puncturing that screen netting.
John Skilling, the World Trade Center's head structural engineer, told the Seattle Times after the 1993 bombing that if a plane struck the building, there would be a horrendous fire, but the building structure would still be there. On August 21st, 2002, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, commenced their investigation. NIST is a government agency that reports back to the United States Department of Commerce, headed at that point by Donald Evans and later replaced by Carlos Gutierrez, both Bush cabinet appointees. As part of their investigation, NIST contracted Underwriters Laboratories to recreate floor models from the Twin Towers for the purpose of fire resistance tests.
We heard about it in the news. We heard about it right away that the floors didn't collapse. Okay, so they tested these huge models. They're models, but they're huge. I mean, one model was essentially the same size and exactly the same as one of the types of floor sections used. And they tested it according to ASTM E119. They exposed it to much longer fire and higher temperatures than we know were present in the World Trade Center. So right away there was a problem. And that's August of 2004.
The final report was released on October 26, 2005, producing over 10,000 pages. It will not explain the actual collapse of the buildings. They only claim to get to collapse initiation and state flatly that it led to global collapse. The report, admittedly, does not actually include the structural behavior of the tower after the conditions for initiation were reached and collapse became inevitable.
We were charged with finding out the cause of the collapse, and we found what happened. I think we've scientifically demonstrated what was required to initiate the collapse. Once the collapse initiated, the video evidence is rather clear. It was not stopped by the floors below, so there was no calculation that we did to demonstrate that, what is clear from the videos.
NIST concludes that they found no evidence suggesting that the World Trade Center towers were brought down by controlled demolition. Where would people get an idea like that? 1. Except for material that was blown outwards, the Twin Towers collapsed into their own footprint symmetrically at nearly free-fall speeds. Newton's laws of motion determine how long it takes an object to travel a certain distance in complete freefall. In a controlled environment, an object dropped from the roof of either twin tower would reach the ground in 9.2 seconds. The 9/11 Commission report will state, at 9:58, the South Tower collapsed in 10 seconds. Even NIST says the tops of the buildings came down essentially in free fall. Judge for yourself.
And our conclusion is that the buildings should not have fallen that rapidly if indeed fire caused the collapse. And in fact, there's one mechanical engineer, Gordon Ross, in the Journal of 911 Studies, who's done a thorough analysis based on conservation momentum.
If the official story was correct, then the heating that was supposed to cause the failure would have been a much slower event, and it would have been an asymmetric event. For the tower to collapse straight down onto itself flies in the face of what we know about steel and how steel behaves. When we have a failure in one area, then the failures tend to continue within that area, and we'd see an asymmetric collapse, possibly the upper section falling off as it twisting away from the tower and falling off. But it's very unusual to see the upper section falling straight through the path of the greatest resistance, which was straight down through the middle of the tower. It just does not add up.
2. Molten metal exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit was discovered in the rubble of Ground Zero, underneath the Twin Towers and Building 7. Even with heavy rain on September 14th and 21st, a constant stream of fire retardants and water, described as creating a giant lake, these fires would not be extinguished until December 13th, 2001, making it the longest burning structural fire in history. Was the jet fuel responsible? Dr. Frank Gale, who was working with NIST, claimed in 2005, your gut reaction would be that the jet fuel melted the steel. Indeed, it did not. The steel did not melt.
The temperatures that we know existed within the collapse, within the debris pile, are physically impossible from an atmospheric jet fuel fire. Cannot be done.
I'm curious about the pool of molten steel that was found in the bottom of the towers.
I am too.
And
please tell me about it. Have you seen it?
Well, not personally, but eyewitnesses there found huge pools of molten steel beneath the towers, and some scientists don't think that the collapse of the building could have melted all that steel.
First of all, let's go back to your basic premise that there was a pool of molten steel. I know of absolutely nobody, no eyewitness who said so, nobody who's produced it. I was on the site, I was on the steel yards, so I don't know that that's so.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails. Like you're in a foundry.
Yeah, like lava.
Like it was lava
from a volcano. Underground, it was still so hot that molten metal dripped down the sides of a wall from Building 6.
However, they do hit hot spots occasionally, and everything stops.
There were fires of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit below the ground.
I don't know that that's so.
There's video of it.
Melted around 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit. I think it's probably pretty difficult to get that kind of temperatures in a fire.
Well, NASA pictures, thermal images showed those sorts of temperatures in the basement.
Would you send them to me?
Okay. My name is Mark, and I'm the individual who was questioning Dr. Gross, and he asked me to email to him those thermal images. When I approached him after his talk to get his email address for that purpose, he refused to provide it to me. I think this is important because it reveals the attitude of the NIST investigators, which is one of willful ignorance of what really happened on 9/11.
As well as the molten metal in the debris, it was also observed prior to the South Tower's collapse. Also, a minute and 20 seconds before collapse, large amounts of white smoke begin pouring from the base of the South Tower. Three, the concrete, and in fact, virtually everything except the metal inside the Twin Towers was pulverized as the building collapsed. This pulverized material created pyroclastic dust clouds that raced down city streets, coating lower Manhattan in a fine dust. Pyroclastic clouds generally occur during two events: volcanic eruptions and controlled demolitions. 4. Steel beams weighing up to 200,000 pounds were thrown laterally up to 500 feet. A cross-section from the World Trade Center weighing approximately 300 tons was embedded in the southeastern corner of the American Express building. This piece would have had to travel at least 390 feet, maintaining enough kinetic energy to embed itself in the corner of the building.
What we should have seen in the debris pile was a pyramidal shape. If it had been a gravity-driven collapse, we would have seen a roughly pyramidal shape or a conic shape. What we actually did see was a massive ejection of dust and debris and large sections of steel from well away from the towers, tens of meters away from the towers. That's hard it's hard to see a reason for that within a gravity-driven collapse.
5. Firefighters and eyewitnesses reported a series of explosions before and during the collapses.
And we heard the noise associated with an implosion.
Secondary explosion on Tower 2.
Some sort of explosive device.
We're obviously having a bit of trouble right now maintaining our location because we just heard one more explosion.
There was another major explosion.
Do you know anything about those extra explosions we heard?
No, I do not.
Were they car bombs?
I have no idea, ma'am.
The street shook, and I heard like an explosion.
Do you know if it was an explosion or if it was a building collapse? To me, it sounded like an explosion. We heard a very loud blast, an explosion. They were taking photographs and securing this area just prior to that huge explosion that we all heard and felt. Not clear now is why this explosion took place. When there was some sort of collapse or explosion.
From street level, as though it had exploded up, a giant rolling ball of flame, and the firefighters screamed, "Run!"
There was this blast of warm air. It wasn't hot. It was warm. And it picked me up and threw me up against the wall of the building.
You were picked up off the ground.
Physically picked up off the ground.
I remember an explosion. At that point, I got knocked out. I don't remember anything. Then I got up, and I looked out the window because the windows exploded, and the street below caved in. And at that point, there was like fireballs coming up.
An hour later than that, we had that big explosion from much, much lower. I don't know what on earth caused that.
About 15 minutes after they made their entry, we heard a boom. I don't know if that was the infrastructure that was going or another explosion.
Again, there has been a second explosion.
John, just seconds ago there was a huge explosion, and it appears right now the second World Trade Tower has just collapsed.
All of a sudden I heard rumbling, and we all started running away from it. The glass blew out and threw me onto the sidewalk, and I couldn't see for 20 seconds.
It was like holy hell coming down them stairs. And then when we finally got to the bottom, they were coming out on the mezzanine level there. And another explosion came right from it, just everyone flying.
We stuck on the stairs for a while. We finally got down to the lobby. Then we get to the lobby, it was this big explosion.
So I was real lucky. I don't know what happened to the people behind me when that blast occurred.
And was actually on the 78th floor of the second tower and was evacuating the tower and experienced all these explosions and made his way back down.
We presume because of the initial explosion, there may have been secondary explosions as well that were detonated in the building by these terrorists.
There was a secondary explosion, probably a device either planted before or on the aircraft that did not explode until an hour later.
I heard a second explosion and another rumble and more smoke and more dust. I ran inside the buildings, the chandelier shook, and again, black smoke filled the air. Within another 5 minutes, we were covered again with more silt and more dust. And then a fire marshal came in and said we had to leave because if there was a third explosion, this building might not last.
Eyewitnesses also reported that explosions had taken place in lower levels of both the North and South Tower.
Here it comes. They were having coffee in the World Trade Center when the first plane struck.
And all of a sudden it sounded like, I don't know where the subway is, but it sounded like a subway collision, a bomb, and it was just pounding, boom, 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 and I literally thought the subway had exploded. And
the ladies that are with me were in the World Trade Center in the first building and escaped through the lobby where they report they believe there was a bomb in the lobby.
Just get out of the tunnel and the blue.
The subway tunnel?
Yeah.
Yes, I was right there. I was down in the basement, came down, all of a sudden the elevator blew up, smoke. I dragged the guy out, his skin was hanging off, and I dragged him out, and I helped him out to the ambulance.
And when I got up to the concourse level, it was just like
you know, like gunfire, and then just 3 big explosions.
And even the turnstile was burnt and was sticking up, and they just told us to run.
I heard the first explosion, and the elevator blew up.
And as we were coming out, we passed the lobby. There was no lobby. So I believe the bomb hit the lobby first, and a couple of seconds then the first plane hit.
Firefighter John Schroeder arrived in the lobby of the North Tower shortly after the first plane struck.
So we're standing there in the lobby, we're getting all together. All of a sudden, we hear... I look down to my right, and the elevators exploded, something out of like a Bruce Willis Die Hard movie. People just come running out of the elevators, on fire, fireballed. I mean, it was like, what is going on here? There's something's up here. I mean, the plane's up there, now there's fire down here. People run around all on fire. This is crazy. So we were heading up to the 24th floor of the stairwell, and all of a sudden we heard, Mayday, Mayday, second plane, second plane. Swift, we're looking at each other like, come on, second plane? There's no way there's a second plane. Within seconds, our building got rocked. We got bounced around in the stairwell like pinballs, man. And we just said, you know what? Time to go. We got down to the lobby, and everything was blown out, exploded. Everything was... And we were the only ones in the lobby now. We're going, wait a second here. Where is everybody? Because the building was coming down the outside. They moved the command post to World Trade Center, too. So now we're like, we didn't get no, where is everybody? We were in the lobby. It looks like everything was exploded. Everything was gone. We're like, what is going on here? We didn't know. We were like, this is crazy. But for every window in the lobby to be exploded, I mean, them windows were like as thick as forget it. They were 2-3-inch glasses. You know, come on. They exploded out of the lobby. You know, something. It wasn't from the jet fuel. No way. The elevators exploded. They were down from the lobby. The lobby was over here. That should never have happened. Something would happen there, and that wasn't. We came down. It looked like a bomb went off in the lobby. There was no fire. It just looked like a bomb went off.
So, how was the largest and most puzzling architectural failure in history treated? The steel from the World Trade Center was mostly shipped overseas, eliminating any possibility of independent investigations. New York City's Department of Design and Construction contracted 4 companies for debris removal. Each was assigned a specific zone and controlled and monitored by a 3-person team. The operation was so controlled that in November, each dump truck used for removal of debris was fitted with a GPS locator. One driver took an extended lunch break and was dismissed from the job. By April 2002, over 185,000 tons of debris had been removed from Ground Zero. FEMA's Building Performance Assessment Team was not even granted access to Ground Zero. They were granted a tour of the site in early October, but were forbidden from collecting samples or examining blueprints. Out of hundreds of thousands of pieces of steel, 150 were preserved at Fresh Kills landfill, from where FEMA conducted its investigation. When the Twin Towers came down, they released over 500 tons of pulverized asbestos into Lower Manhattan, along with lead, barium, mercury, chromium, copper, and several other toxic chemicals. 425,000 cubic yards of concrete is pulverized. 600,000 square feet of glass is turned into dust. During the World Trade Center's construction, spray-on fireproofing comprised of concrete and asbestos was placed on the core columns. When asbestos was outlawed in 1971, they ceased this procedure at the 64th floor of the South Tower. The Port Authority eventually realized that the asbestos presented a problem, and demolition was not an option. In 1989, the Port Authority estimated the removal of asbestos from both the World Trade Center and LaGuardia Airport would have cost up to $1 billion. By 2001, the cost for the World Trade Center buildings alone would have met or exceeded $1 billion. This money would sadly not be needed. Although it was clear that the air was not safe to breathe, the public was urged to return to Lower Manhattan. Wall Street opened back up on September 17th, and children were allowed to go back to school. Firefighters, police, and rescue workers were allowed to toil in lethal conditions using paper masks from Home Depot, while government officials walked around in hazmat suits.
My name's John Field. I was hurt at Ground Zero during the cleanup. Wow, you know, I was only there for 5 days before I was horribly injured, and I mean horribly injured. Leading up to that day, every day I was there, I complained that it was an unsafe workplace. Someone's going to get it. It just happened to be me. But I let everybody know that someone will get hurt. I was there for 5.5 days. Nobody told me to wear a mask once. Nobody gave a shit when that piece of steel altered my life. But like the thousands that are suffering and sick, I didn't roll over and play dead. And I know human life takes a backseat to the almighty dollar, and that's what makes this country roll and run, is the almighty dollar. But you guys somewhere along the line lost your credibility with me.
The Environmental Protection Agency, under direct orders from the White House, told New Yorkers that the air was safe to breathe. The administrator at the time, Christine Whitman, issued an internal memo on September 12th, declaring that all statements to the media should be cleared through the National Security Council before they are released.
So what happened? The White House changed EPA press releases to add reassuring statements and delete cautionary ones. September 13th, the EPA draft release, never released to the public, says EPA testing terrorized sites for environmental hazards. The White House changes that to EPA reassures public about environmental hazards. September 16th, the EPA draft says recent samples of dust on Water Street show higher levels of asbestos. The White House version, new samples confirm ambient air quality meets OSHA standards and is not a cause for public concern. And the White House leaves out entirely this warning, that air samples raise concerns for cleanup workers and office workers near Water Street. Why all these changes?
We were told that a desire to reopen Wall Street and national security concerns were the reasons for changing the press releases.
Christy Todd Whitman should be in jail for manslaughter. Christy, go to jail. Do not piss. Go. Just go to jail. Lock yourself up. When I said that, everybody said, don't you think that's a little harsh? And I said, no. 6 months later, every politician was saying it. Everybody was saying it like it was like saying hi. I pat myself on the back for having the nerve and the audacity to say that. She took orders from Condoleezza Rice, who took orders from the White House. They knew the air was bad. They lied. You should go to jail for manslaughter. For every time somebody dies. James Sedroga, Don Jones, Tim Keller, my close personal friend who I had to go to his funeral, Officer Borgia, and the many more that have died. I take this personally now. I take it real personal. You got an ex-mayor running for president who claims he helped us. Standing on a pile with a bullhorn, Mr. President and Mr. Giuliani, does not constitute helping anybody. At all.
The EPA's public release assured people that there was no significant level of asbestos in the air, and that instead of evacuating, they could clean their homes with a wet rag. More people will die post 9/11 from these illnesses than died on the day itself. By 2006, 70% of the 40,000 Ground Zero workers had developed respiratory problems. Hundreds of them had developed cancer, and over 80 had died. To make matters worse, a large majority of the victims from the World Trade Center were denied a decent burial and treated like garbage. A pile of approximately 500,000 tons of ash located at Fresh Kills landfill contains 1,148 victims that have yet to be identified. Mayor Bloomberg has repeatedly denied family members' requests, replying, "I've only visited my father's grave once." On top of all of this, human remains were discovered up to 400 feet away from the South Tower, on the roof of the Deutsche Bank building. 300 bone fragments were discovered between April 7th and 14th, 2006, and more are expected to be found. Is all of the above possible with a gravity-driven global collapse? Were the Twin Towers brought down as a result of the airplanes that struck them and the fires that followed, or were they brought down in a controlled demolition?
same
All right,
time.
some new information coming in. Report from Associated Press of a large plane crashing in western Pennsylvania. This is according to officials at the Somerset County Airport. A large plane crashing in western Pennsylvania.
We had that plane crash. I'm sorry, go ahead, Skip.
Say it again. Repeat, please, Skip.
I'm saying somebody may have made that horrible decision to go ahead and take the plane down.
10:03 a.m., Shanksville, Pennsylvania. United Airlines Flight 93 allegedly plows into an abandoned strip mine at 580 miles per hour. 20 minutes flying time from Washington, D.C. Originally, the official story is that passengers on board the plane overthrew the hijackers and sacrificed themselves to prevent further casualties. The 9/11 Commission will later conclude that hijacker Ziad Jarrah, anticipating a cockpit overthrow, crashes the plane into the ground. Debris from Flight 93 was found considerable distances from the crash site.
The debris here is spread over a 3 to 4 mile radius, which has now been completely sealed off and is being treated, according to the FBI, as a crime scene. This is one of those cases where the pictures really do tell the story, that sort of the most horrifying aspect of this particular crash scene is how little debris is visible. That's really all you see is a large crater in the ground and just tiny, tiny bits of debris. There has been at least one report that the investigators out there, and there are hundreds of them, as I said tonight, have found nothing larger than a phone book.
Well, Darren, in the last hour or so, the FBI and the state police here have confirmed that they have cordoned off a second area about 6 to 8 miles away from the crater here where this plane went down. This is apparently another debris site, which raises a number of questions. Why would debris from the plane, and they identified it specifically as being from this plane, why would debris be located 6 miles away? Could it have blown that far away? Seems highly unlikely. Almost all the debris found at this site is within 100 yards, 200 yards away. So it raises some questions. We don't want to over-speculate, of course.
It seems to me from covering a number of plane crashes on the scene that, if nothing else, you can say this is not typical for a plane crash to be spread across an area this large.
It certainly doesn't make sense because most of the debris has been found in a very compact area within 100 yards, 200 yards, maybe a little beyond that. And then all of a sudden they're telling us 6 miles away they have another concentration of debris. They say it's very small pieces. Most of these are very small pieces. Most of the pieces here are no bigger than the size of a briefcase, they say, and the pieces 6 miles away maybe even smaller than that.
Behind me, and so
Did they find a plane in Shanksville?
Within the last hour. I want to get quickly to Chris Kanicki. He was back there just a couple of minutes ago, and Chris, I've seen the pictures. It looks like there's nothing there except for a hole in the ground.
Basically, that's right. The only thing you could see from where we were was a big gouge in the earth and some broken trees. From where we could see, there wasn't much left.
Any large pieces of debris at all?
No, there was nothing that you could distinguish that a plane had crashed there.
Smoke, fire?
Nothing. It was absolutely quiet. It was actually very quiet. Nothing going on down there, no smoke, no fire, just a couple of people walking around. They look like part of the NTSB crew walking around looking at the pieces.
How big would you say that hole was?
From my estimates, I would guess it was probably about 20 to 15 feet long and probably about 10 feet long or 10 feet wide.
What could you see on the ground, if anything, other than dirt and ash? And
you couldn't see anything. You could just see dirt, ash, and people walking around, broken trees.
From the Somerset County coroner to the mayor of Shanksville, almost every eyewitness would remark how little of the plane and its passengers remained.
But when I got there, I wondered to myself, where is it? There was the plane was just totally disintegrated. The only thing we didn't see were people.
Nothing to indicate that there was even anybody on the plane.
I remember asking a state trooper that was there to be sure, is that where the plane went down? It was so hard to tell because there was nothing around.
The Pennsylvania state website puts it best. It is difficult to believe that a 757 plunged into the ground with such force that the plane literally disintegrated and created a still, smoldering crater. Is there any historical precedent for a commercial airliner disintegrating upon impact.
The emergency services realize their task is hopeless. John Heavey and his team confront the horror of the scene. The twisted wreckage of 191 lies scattered for hundreds of meters. Debris has smashed into the trailer park, destroying 5 homes.
In 1988, Pan Am 103 exploded in mid-air over the town of Lockerbie in Scotland, killing 270 people. Terrorists checked a bag containing a bomb into the hold, but didn't board the plane. The sea below them is on fire.
The governor is saying that the pilot was able to dump fuel over Jamaica Bay.
It immediately veered over to the right, and it came nose down, only a block away from where I was working.
And the room just exploded. My daughter got blown through the patio doors. My wife got blown into the living room, and I got blown out the patio doors behind my daughter.
Several blocks away from the primary crash scene, the aircraft may have been rocked by vibrations severe enough to knock the engines off the wings.
Jim, let me just tell our audience what you're looking at. These are from Jamaica Bay. This is clearly a part of the plane.
Yes, that would be the horizontal stabilizer, the vertical tail fin on the back of the airplane.
In 2006, during the trial of Zacharias Moussaoui, the FBI managed to provide a multitude of evidence that appears to have survived a catastrophic crash in near pristine condition. Among the exhibits were a red bandana, a Kingdom of Saudi Arabia driver's license, John Talignani's driver's license, and flight attendant C.C. Lyle's personal effects, including her driver's license and Marriott hotel card. Although a 757 managed to obliterate itself upon impact, paper and fabric managed to survive without a scratch. They also released pictures of an engine and 2 pieces of fuselage. It is not specified where those were found. Once again, the FBI stepped in to supervise every aspect of the investigation. They repeatedly denied family members' requests to listen to the cockpit voice recorder. The FBI gave in on April 18, 2002, as long as the victims' relatives didn't talk about it. And for some reason, the last 3 minutes were unaccounted for. No explanation has been given. Even after Zacharias Moussaoui's sentencing, the actual cockpit voice recorder has yet to be released. The 9/11 Commission concludes that the military was not informed of Flight 93 until 10:07, minutes after it had crashed.
We heard the explosion. Actually, our power had gone off, and then we felt a tremor. We had just gotten up, and the next thing I know, it sounded like a missile came across our house. I mean, they were going that fast. It was flying. It was coming from that direction. I have no idea what it was. Oh no, it wasn't. It wasn't the aircraft that crashed. No, it's hard for me to believe that they did not know about that aircraft until 10:07. That's difficult for me to believe.
Despite the discussions about military assistance, no one from FAA headquarters requested military assistance regarding United 93, nor did any manager at FAA headquarters pass any of the information it had about United 93 to the military.
A year after 9/11, military officials were telling an entirely different story, that Flight 93 was being tracked.
In the Pentagon Command Center, there's a report of another hijacked plane, United Airlines Flight 93.
We received a report from the FAA that Flight 93 had turned off its transponder, had turned, and was now heading towards Washington, D.C. The decision was made to try to go intercept Flight 93.
The rules have changed. We could do something about it now.
Colonel Bob Marr is in command at the Northeast Air Defense Sector base in Rome, New York.
The words that I remember as clear as day was, "We will take lives in the air to preserve lives on the ground."
Marr orders his air controllers tell the pilots to intercept Flight 93.
United Airlines Flight 93 will not be allowed to reach Washington, D.C.
The closure time came and went, and nothing had happened. So you can imagine everything was very tense.
Flight 93 is about 175 miles north and west of Washington, flying over Somerset County, Pennsylvania. Up above, a fighter jet streaks by.
It was about, 10:03 that the fighters reported that Flight 93 had crashed.
Eventually, of course, we never fired on any aircraft.
When you heard the plane was down without a shot being fired at it, do you remember what you said?
We just witnessed an act of heroism.
Was Flight 93 downed by hijackers in an open field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania? Or is the truth being withheld from the public?
I want to tell you that we are getting word from New York right now that another building has collapsed. I understand that this is a 47-story building.
It's Building 7 of the World Trade Center, we understand, has collapsed in New York, and there you saw a video of it. Now, whether we don't even know whether this was something that was engineered for safety reasons or it just happened.
For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
In 1984, construction began on World Trade Center Building 7, a 47-story office building, 570 feet tall, and 300 feet away from the North Tower. It opened to the public in 1987 and housed offices for Department of Defense, Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Internal Revenue Service. Building 7 was considered the Central Intelligence Agency's largest station outside of Washington, D.C., and was also the Secret Service's biggest field office. Numerous cases would be closed due to its destruction. On June 8, 1999, Mayor Rudolph Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management Command Center on the 23rd floor is opened.
The command center on the 23rd floor is bulletproof and bomb-resistant, with its own air supply and generators. It's linked to city airports, the Coast Guard, and the Pentagon. Computers will soon have detailed blueprints of every major building in New York City, as well as evacuation routes. Hurricanes and heat waves would be handled here, as well as terrorist attacks. Though New York officials say their facility is not impenetrable, they're confident it could handle even the worst crisis imaginable. Deborah Fayerick for CNN, New York.
The 50,000 square foot center has reinforced, bulletproof, and bomb-resistant walls, its own air supply and water tank, beds and showers, and 3 backup generators. It has countless monitors which oversee police and fire department responses, and it is staffed around the clock. Hours before the first plane would strike the World Trade Center, Building 7's alarm system would be placed on test status at 6:47 a.m. for a scheduled period of 8 hours. This normally occurs during maintenance, and any fire alarms from the building are disregarded. After the second plane strikes the South Tower, the building's power is shut off and its tenants are evacuated. The major fires in World Trade Center 7 were as follows. On the east face, between floors 11 and 12. On the north face, on floors 7 and 12. On the west face, between floors 29 and 30. Smoke obscures the entire south face of the building. By 3 p.m., Chief Daniel Nigro of the FDNY had set up a collapse zone around Building 7. After 4 p.m., news outlets began reporting that the building had collapsed.
We are getting information now that one of the other buildings, Building 7 in the World Trade Center complex, is on fire and has either collapsed or is collapsing.
We've got some news just coming in, actually, that the Salomon Brothers building in New York, right in the heart of Manhattan, has also collapsed. Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing, and indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were. And it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Presumably there were very few people in the Salomon building when it collapsed. I mean, there were, I suppose, fears of possible further collapses around the area.
That's what you would hope, because this whole downtown area behind me has been completely sealed off and evacuated, apart from the emergency workers. That was done by the mayor, Rudy Giuliani.
Jane, I think many of us, when we heard the news, perhaps on the radio earlier today, were completely flabbergasted by it and just couldn't comprehend it. I mean, it almost sounded too far-fetched. I was wondering what it's felt like for you being in Manhattan. Well, unfortunately, I think we've lost the line with Jane Stanley in Manhattan. Perhaps we can rejoin her and follow that up later.
Where did CNN and BBC get their information, especially considering the building was still standing directly behind their reporters? The collapse of the building at 5:20 p.m. would cause speculation as to how it fell. The collapse of the main structure takes place in approximately 6.5 seconds, and the building falls symmetrically into its own footprint, barely damaging the surrounding structures. It will create a pyroclastic cloud that mushrooms down surrounding streets. Initially, it is assumed that the building's diesel tank may have been responsible for the collapse. The Federal Emergency Management Agency's report in 2002 will state that the specifics of the fires in WTC-7 and how they caused the building to collapse remain unknown at this time.
FEMA does analyze the collapse of Building 7, but then they say our best hypothesis has only a low probability of occurrence. This needs further investigation, and I certainly agree with them on that. Then NIST has handed the ball. It's kind of a hot potato. Okay, NIST, you explain the collapse of World Trade Center 7, this rapid, straight-down collapse of this 47-story skyscraper.
Sadly, by this time, virtually all structural steel from Ground Zero had been recycled, and no steel was recovered from Building 7 for investigation. As of this date, NIST is still working on their final report.
NIST decoupled the study of the collapse of Building 7 from the analysis of the collapse of the towers. So now it's sitting over here. The report on the collapse of Building 7 from NIST is long overdue. We're still waiting for it, hoping they have an explanation.
We are looking at it. There's actually a very good write-up recently from Controlled Demolition Experts, which you probably ought to read. We haven't finished the investigation yet, so I'm not at liberty to talk about any intermediate findings.
The collapse is assumed to be caused by a combination of fire and structural damage. Did any other surrounding buildings suffer a complete collapse at near freefall speed? Building 3, a 22-story building directly below the Twin Towers, was split in half by the South Tower's collapse. Although the building was severely crushed by falling debris, the structure remained standing. Building 4, a 9-story building east of the South Tower, was almost completely destroyed. The remaining structure did not collapse. Building 5, a 9-story building east of the North Tower, suffered from severe fires and structural damage. Building 6, an 8-story building between the North Tower and Building 7, suffered a giant gouge in its roof and severe fires. Neither Building 5 or 6 suffered global collapse. Neither did the Deutsche Bank building, which stands to this day and is currently being demolished beam by beam. Neither did the Millennium Hotel across the street. Building 7 burns over a number of floors and suffers structural damage to its south face before collapsing completely to the ground. Did anything occur inside the building that might cause a collapse?
We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Flew us back into the 8th floor. And I turned to Hesh. I said, this is it. We're dead. We're not going to make it out of here.
And we have Frank Ucciotto back on the phone with us, Brenda, with some New York City officials. Frank, go ahead.
That's right. I'm standing here right now just off Broadway by City Hall with Michael Hess, who is the city's corporation counsel. Mr. Hess, you were trapped in, I believe, 7 World Trade Center. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, I was. I was up in the Emergency Management Center on the 23rd floor, and when all the power went out in the building, another gentleman and I walked down to the 8th floor where there was an explosion, and we've been trapped on the 8th floor with smoke, thick smoke all around us for about an hour and a half. But the New York Fire Department, as terrific as they are, just came and got us out.
Their experience is mentioned by NIST's interim report on Building 7. However, the authors claim it is the collapse of the North Tower. The glass on the ground floor was not even blown out. Would debris and smoke rushing up the stairway be described as an explosion? So, we have a 47-story steel-framed skyscraper, which housed various government agencies and numerous important documents, damaged less than the other World Trade Center buildings. At 5:20 p.m., all structural elements inside Building 7 simultaneously fail, and it collapses symmetrically, imploding into a pile of rubble. This building had 81 columns, 24 core, and 57 perimeter, running from the basement to the roof. For the building to have collapsed the way it did, all 81 of these columns had to collapse simultaneously. Could fires on a few floors have heated up all these columns to the breaking point at the same time? Let's ask the 9/11 Commission.
Governor Keene, may I ask another question, please? At 5:20 p.m. on September 11th, World Trade Center building number 7, 47-story modern frame steel skyscraper that no plane hit, collapsed into a neat little pile onto itself and exhibiting all the characteristics of controlled demolition. FEMA, in their investigation, didn't say that. They said that fire must have knocked it down, but they couldn't figure out how. Video evidence shows what appears to be explosive squids going up the side of the building from south to north or from bottom to top as the building collapsed. There was molten metal found in the basement of that building at temperatures that exceeded anything normal fire could cause. With all the confusion about what happened to Building 7, why is there not a word about the collapse of that building in the 911 Commission report?
We didn't see any evidence of the kind of thing you're talking about. We thought that was part of the tragedy of 9/11. The building collapsed later on. There was not a loss of life in that building. And it was not part of our report.
Not part of the report. Thanks.
Governor?
Yeah. So for the 9/11 Commission to totally ignore that, I think is unconscionable and shows that they did not do a thorough job.
Did Building 7 collapse because of damage from the falling North Tower? Or was it also a controlled demolition?
27 jaar ervaring in het slopen van gebouwen met explosieven. Hij is de absolute top in Nederland. Zijn reactie op de beelden die we laten zien is onbevangen.
Zie je vanaf boven gaan? Nee, je gaat vanaf onder.
Die gaat vanaf onder, ja.
Toch?
Ja.
Ze hebben gewoon kolommen weggeblazen. Er is nagesprongen.
Dit valt anders dan het World Trade Center.
Vind je niet dan?
Ja, je ziet het, de onderste verdiepingen gaan eerst.
Ja, en de rest zakt er gewoon in. Dus dit is controlled demolition.
Zeker weten?
Zeker weten. Er is nagesprongen. Dit is in opdracht gebeurd. Dit heeft een team gedaan van experts.
Maar dit is ook op 11 september gebeurd.
Dezelfde dag?
Dezelfde dag.
Dezelfde dag? Weet je dat zeker?
Ja.
Was het zeker weten de 11e? Dat kan geen waar zijn.
7 uur nadat de World Trade Center naar beneden viel.
Ja? Hebben ze hard gewerkt.
In the aftermath of 9/11, citizens and politicians alike would demand that steps be taken to ensure such attacks never happen again. In late January 2002, Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle receives calls from both President Bush and Vice President Dick Cheney, urging him to limit the investigation to the House and Senate committees. The administration would continue to oppose the investigation until November 2002, when Congress creates the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States to make a full and complete accounting of the circumstances surrounding the attacks. Democratic leaders concede several aspects after the White House threatens to create the commission by executive order, giving themselves considerable control. President Bush officially signs it into law November 27, 2002, and names Henry Kissinger as chairman of the 9/11 Commission. The Chicago Tribune puts it best. Kissinger is known more for keeping secrets from the American public than telling the truth. On December 13, 2002, Kissinger resigns from the 9/11 Commission, due mostly to a congressional demand that he disclose his private business clients. It would later be revealed that Kissinger was the chief advisor to the Bush administration regarding the Iraq War, a lie which has now cost more American lives than 9/11 itself. Thomas Kean and Lee Hamilton are named as chairman and vice chairman of the 9/11 Commission. By December 16, 2002, the 10 initial members of the 9/11 Commission have been appointed. And the man missing from this picture? Philip Zelikow, Executive Director. He would shape both the commission and its final report. The 9/11 Commission begins its investigation with a time frame of 18 months and a starting budget of $3 million. January 27, 2003. The 9/11 Commission holds its first hearing in Washington, D.C. Vice Chairman Lee Hamilton will claim a few days later, "We're not interested in trying to assess blame. We do not consider that part of the Commission's responsibility." March 26, 2003. The Bush administration denies the Commission's request for an additional $11 million in funding. 3 days later, the Commission is offered $9 million, and they accept. In April 2004, President Bush agrees to testify before the 9/11 Commission, but only if Vice President Dick Cheney joins in. Why did they insist on appearing together?
The 9/11 Commission wants to ask us questions. That's why we're meeting, and I look forward to meeting with them and answering their questions.
I was asking why you're appearing together rather than separately, which was their request.
Because it's a good chance for both of us to answer questions that the 9/11 Commission is looking forward to asking us, and I'm looking forward to answering them.
On April 29, 2004, behind closed doors, President Bush and Vice President Dick Cheney appear together before the 9/11 Commission for approximately 3 hours. They are not placed under oath, their testimony is not recorded, and the Commission's notes are subject to White House censorship.
Mr. President, as you know, a lot of critics suggested that you wanted to appear jointly with the Vice President so that you two could keep your story straight or something.
Yeah.
Could you tell us what you think of the value of appearing together and how you would answer those critics?
Yeah, first of all, look, I mean, if we had something to hide, we wouldn't have met with them in the first place. I came away good about the session. I think they found it to be useful. Yeah, Adam.
Mr. President,
Yes.
don't you think that the families deserve to have a transcript or to be able to see what you
Adam,
said?
you asked me that question yesterday.
For an
I got
answer
the
today.
same answer, yeah.
May 19, 2004, Rudolph Giuliani testifies before the 9/11 Commission.
We will now hear from our first witness,
the very distinguished former mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani. Mayor Giuliani, would you please rise and raise your right hand so I can place you under oath?
And the fact that so many of them interpreted it that way kept a much calmer situation and a much better evacuation. These people.
I would please ask.
My son was murdered!
You are simply wasting time at this point. It should be used for questions. Please.
Thomas Kane and Lee Hamilton will later claim in their book, Without Precedent, that they were too soft on Mayor Giuliani. One of the questions they failed to ask was who warned him that the South Tower was going to collapse.
Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
I can, Peter.
Are you talking about did you go immediately to the Office of Emergency Management?
I went down to the scene and we set up headquarters at 75 Barclay Street, which was right there with the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, and we were operating out of there when we were told that the World Trade Center was going to collapse, and it did collapse before we could actually get out of the building.
Who didn't warn everyone in the building?
I admire that greatly, and I think that may very well be one of the reasons for your leadership and your cooperation with this commission.
Thank you. God bless.
The 9/11 Commission would release its final report on July 22, 2004, and closed its doors on August 21st.
So the 9/11 Commission was a cover-up. The question is what it was covering up. The charitable explanation is gross negligence, malfeasance, misfeasance, and what you call it, okay?
If you can't read all 571 pages of the report, in August 2006, the 9/11 Report comic book was released. It should tell you all you need to know. On the morning of September 11th, 19 Arabs boarded 4 commercial airliners at 3 different airports and crashed them into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, with 0 military intervention. Or, we have been and continue to be lied to about the events of September 11th, and that elements within the United States government and mainstream media continue to cover up the truth. These are the same people that lied about weapons of mass destruction. They endorsed a lie that's killed several 100,000 innocent people overseas. Could they also endorse a lie that killed almost 3,000 innocent people in our own country? Our entire foreign and domestic policy has been based upon the events of September 11th. It has enabled the passage of Patriot Act 1 and 2, established the Department of Homeland Security, facilitated the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, and used to pass the Military Commissions Act, which officially ended habeas corpus.
Habeas corpus in Latin means you have the body. It's a provision in the law where no one can just scoop up someone, put them in a black hole and keep them there without that person having the right to appeal to a court and say, you have the body, now what do you charge this person with and what redress does he or she have?
As well as domestic surveillance, all in the name of fighting terrorism. And who ends up paying for all this? You do. Your children do. When President Bush entered office, he inherited a $284 billion surplus. His administration is now responsible for 4 out of the top 5 deficits in history. The 5th place belongs to his father. As of November 2nd, 2005, the Bush administration had borrowed more from foreign nations than all previous administrations combined. From 1776 to 2000, 42 presidents borrowed a total of $1.01 trillion from foreign governments and institutions. From 2001 to 2005, the Bush administration alone borrowed $1.05 trillion. Where does this money go? The government designed by the people, for the people, has turned its back on us. Or have we turned our backs on it? They spy on us. They torture and imprison innocent civilians. Ask yourself, what's happening? Where are we headed? And would we be here today without 9/11?
Will somebody please tell us who's in charge? We need order. We can't stand this new world slaughter. It reeks of oil seats and bloody handshakes. U.S. interests and war profiteers. Our life is here in the belly of the beast. Where thieves kill the innocent and pray for peace. Slaughter for the chief commander. So we're at the White House steps demanding answers, but they don't got none. We've got few choices: protest or pick up shotguns. We're so stressed we know the watcher might arrest us, though with the key for talking. And we ain't made no death threats. Feds upset, so our phones infested. Think John Lennon resurrected, speaking truth to power till we have no breath left. We say no more. We're gonna fight back. We want the truth out. We want our rights back. Loose change. Change is loose, no stopping now. Change is loose, no stopping now. We say no more. We're gonna fight back. We want the truth out. We want our rights back. Loose change. Change is loose, no stopping now. Change is loose, no stopping now. We keep our mouths and minds open, hoping we can change the world. Media blackout, still we don't act out. We've been civilized despite the killing. You call yourselves patriots, label us villains. My comrades and nomads get born free, think it's rich kids, poor kids, lawyers and teachers. Dads, moms, past war veterans, peddling the truth. We ain't settling, the proof is clear as Watergate. You got a lot of hate trying to charm us with a plot of hate.
What are you, an asshole?
Your war's illegal, your cause is evil, you're born people. And threaten us with a sequel. You're a sicko psycho. We've seen the proof. You can't intimidate the world from delivering truth. We're bigger than you. 40 million plus. Your guns ain't big enough to make us hush. We say no more. We're gonna fight back. We want the truth out. We want our rights back. Loose change. Change is loose, no stopping now. Change is loose, no stopping now. We say no more. We're gonna fight back. We want the truth out. We want our rights back. Loose change. Change is loose, no stopping now. Change is loose, no stopping now. We do this for the lives lost, devoured by evil, for the sake of the memory of innocent people, engulfed by the gluttony of hooligans who leave the world in ruins. Men here to do us in, but there's just a few of them and more of us. We warriors on the quest for justice. We crush the lies, trust only the facts. Just open your eyes. Who really attacked my feelings exactly? Facts be lacking on the hijacking, synchronized war games, facilitated plane crashes. And they wonder why we keep asking questions. Am I lesson, lady liberty, like it's a profession? So here we are, the infantry. We the people simply need to start a revolution of our minds, and eventually the crime of the century will finally be solved. Until then, we stand tall and say no more. We're gonna fight back. We want the truth out. We want our rights back. Loose change. Change is loose, no stopping now. Change is loose, no stopping now. We say no more. We're gonna fight back. We want the truth out. We want our rights back. Loose change. Change is loose, no stopping now. Change is loose, no stopping now.
Remember this, your government funds